Hey guys, I'm Miss Anna, the Youth Services Assistant Librarian for Decatur Public Library, and welcome to All About, where we talk about different people, places, and things from history. I hope you're ready for an adventure story, because today we're talking about one of my favorite explorers, John Wesley Powell. He led the first scientific expedition down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon. To help tell his story, we've created a stop-motion video with our library Lego collection. That'll come a little bit later, so keep watching for that. But first, let's talk about his life before he took on the Grand Canyon. So here is my John Wesley Powell. Our story begins in 1834. John Wesley Powell was born in New York State, and this is my map of the America in the 1860s. So we're gonna put a star right here on New York State, where he was born. His father, Joseph, was a Methodist preacher and expected his son to grow up and become a preacher too. But like most boys, he needed to go to school and get an education first, and that would happen in Ohio when he was 7. There we go. When he was 7, his family moved from New York to Ohio. And this was pre-Civil War times, and slavery was still popular in many states. What was unpopular was to be an abolitionist. And an abolitionist was someone who condemned slavery or said it was wrong to keep slaves, which the Powell family believed. Joseph Powell, John Wesley Powell's father, even condemned slavery from the pulpit, which was kind of controversial at the time. And this actually led to Wesley being bullied in school, so the family decided to homeschool him. His teacher was their neighbor, George Crookham, and he was a real interesting guy and also had a really impressive farm. His farm was 480 acres, and on that property was an informal school where Crookham himself had educated his own 16 kids. The schoolhouse led to a museum where he kept all of his books and all sorts of items found in nature. You see, George was a naturalist. He loved studying things in nature, and he would guide Wesley in cool science experiments. They would go on field trips, they would explore fields, they would explore forests and caves and ponds and study all these different things in nature. And Wesley loved these lessons with Mr. Crookham. Now, like the Powells, Crookham was an abolitionist too. In fact, his farm was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And one day, an angry mob torched his farm because they found out that he was an abolitionist, and this brought about an end to Wesley's childhood lessons from him. So soon after that, the family moved away. This time, they moved to Illinois, and that is right here. So they're just traveling further west. Are you picking up on the idea that the Powells moved around a lot? By this time, Wesley was 17 years old, and while his father expected him to become a preacher, Wesley wanted to find his own path, and this led him to becoming a teacher. For a time, he taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Wisconsin. So where is Wisconsin on our map? It is right there. Here we go. In Wisconsin, as a teacher, he earned $14 a month. Now, after that, he spent a year wandering around the state looking for natural specimens. And these are things like plants, animals, shells, fossils, anything that he could collect and put in a bag and take home. He traveled the length of the Mississippi River, which starts here in Minnesota and goes down all the way to Louisiana. And then he traveled the length of the Ohio River, which begins in Pennsylvania and meets the Mississippi there. And then he made his way to an untamed, let me find a sticker. he made his way to an untamed section of Missouri to look for more natural specimens. This guy loved to explore, and in 1860, America hadn't been fully explored yet. There were parts out west that hadn't even been traveled or mapped yet. Also by 1860, Powell was getting a reputation as a naturalist. In his own personal greenhouse, he had over 6,000 plants and was giving lectures around the states for his explorations. Then, in 1862, came the Civil War, the war between the states. As a strong abolitionist, when President Lincoln called troops to defend the anti-slavery Union, Powell enlisted. In the Battle of Shiloh, he was struck by a bullet in the wrist of his right arm, and his arm had to be amputated below the elbow after getting infected. After the war, he continued his life, though, exploring. He even got married, which meant he had someone to go exploring with, and her name was Emma Dean. And there's my picture of Emma Dean right there. Her name was Emma Dean, and together they explored the Rocky Mountains. There, they collected natural specimens and climbed Long's Peak, a mountain peak that no one else had climbed before. And they got a lot of publicity for doing that. But more than that, this inspired Powell to lead the Colorado River expedition, which he is most known for and which our episode is really about. Now, parts of the Colorado River had been explored by different people, but not the path that John Wesley Powell wanted to explore. His plan? To take a team of boats and travel down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon. This would be the first scientific expedition through the Grand Canyon, and Powell's prime goal for this trip was to create an accurate map. And now, to tell the story in stop-motion animation with our library Lego collection is Powell's 99-day scientific expedition down the Colorado River. This is John Wesley Powell. For his expedition, he had 4 boats made. 3 of the boats were sturdy, watertight oak boats.
These are the boats to carry our food, supplies, and scientific equipment. The men even named them all. We've got Kitty Clyde's sister, Maid of the Canyon, and No Name.
What about the smaller boat?
Ah, the scout boat. Light and easy to guide in the water. That's named after my wife, Emma Dean.
Powell recruited 9 adventurers to join him. These men were an eclectic group, and although this was being called a scientific expedition, not a single one of them was a scientist. Supplies were divided up evenly between the 3 large boats, and on May 24th, 1869, the 10 of them waved goodbye to the townspeople and began their journey on a wide, calm stretch of river. Riding with Powell on the Emma Dean was Jack Sumner, a wilderness guide, and William Dunn, a hunter. On Kitty Clyde's sister was Walter Powell, Wesley's younger brother, and George Bradley. On Maid of the Canyon was Billy Hawkins, the expedition cook, and Andy Hall. And on No Name was Ormel Howland, a newspaper editor, his younger brother Seneca Howland, and Frank Goodman, a British adventurer who had begged Powell to let him join the crew. From the scout boat, Powell used different flags and motions to warn the others about what was ahead and instruct them what to do. If a dangerous rapid were ahead, he might motion to pull over to shore, which is exactly what he was motioning 16 days into the journey when No Name missed the warning. While the 3 other boats pulled to shore, No Name was taken up by the current into the first rapid and slammed into a huge rock and shattered.
The cargo was swept away, but at least no one drowned.
A third of our food supplies are gone. From now on, we'll portage the boats around the more dangerous rapids. We can't afford to lose another boat like that.
What that meant is they would carry the boat and supplies over land rather than risk going through violent rapids. However, 9 days later, another incident occurred. After several days in a very dark canyon, they found a small stretch of beach. They pulled over for a rest, and here they were able to stretch their legs and hang clothes out to dry on trees and bushes. With that wind, our clothes will be dry in no time.
Who wants coffee? I'm going to start a fire and make some.
A sudden gust of wind blew through the canyon, catching the campfire and spreading it to the nearby bushes and trees. The men ran to the boats, jumped in, and rowed a little further down. Several articles of clothing were burned, and one man lost his hat. At the beginning of July, the group made another stop. They had reached the Great Uinta Valley. Powell and British adventurer Frank Goodman hiked 40 miles to the Uinta Indian Reservation to replenish supplies and mail letters. Powell, I've been thinking, this expedition's too much for me. I'm not going back with you.
Goodman, best of luck to you.
They kept moving forward with one less adventurer. On July 8th, they reached Desolation Canyon. Powell was constantly making notes during their trip about the things he saw, the plants, animals, and rock formations. And while exploring the canyon walls here, Powell found himself stuck on a steep rock wall, 60 to 80 feet above ground. He was unable to climb away from the rocky ledge because of his missing arm, but thankfully, he wasn't alone.
Bradley, I'm stuck. Help me.
We forgot the rope. There's no rope to pull you up with.
There has to be something.
My pants!
To save Powell, Bradley took off his pants and used them as a rope and pulled Powell to safety. As they continued, the river rapids were becoming bigger, rougher, and closer together. Rapids were so close that some days they would have to portage their boats several times a day. This slowed their progress and also took a toll on the men, physically and mentally. By July 16th, they'd reached the halfway mark at the junction of Green and Grand Rivers. Here, they mapped the area, repaired their boats, and dried their food. Their food supply was dwindling very quickly. The days were so warm, any meat they kept spoiled, and the flour was growing mold from constantly getting wet. Near the end of July, on one stop, Bill Dunn was standing near the river edge, making notes when he accidentally fell in the water. In his pocket was Powell's pocket watch. Bill was the strongest swimmer of the group, and the water here was so rough that he barely made it out alive. Thankfully, he did. But when Powell discovered that his pocket watch had been ruined in the accident, he was not happy. That was his favorite watch. All of the unexpected problems, the food spoiling, no-name shattering, the hard work and exhaustion, hit Powell all at once. He became furious and lashed out at Dunn for the accident.
That was my favorite watch. Pay me $30 to replace it or leave the expedition.
Dunn could do neither. He didn't have the money, and to leave the party now would be a death sentence. Powell must have known this because the issue wasn't forced, and they continued on their journey together. On August 10th, this expedition's 79th day, the men entered the Grand Canyon.
Would you look at these sandstone walls? They stretch up thousands of feet high. These may be some of the most violent rapids we've encountered. They're roaring like nothing we've heard before.
Let's rest here for 2 days.
These were menacing and loud rumbles that the men had to yell at each other just to be heard. While in the Grand Canyon, it rained nearly every night.
Between the river and the rain, there's no way to protect our food, and this rain is keeping me from lighting fires.
The river's too muddy to drink here. At least we can drink the rainwater. Isn't that right, Ormel?
Yes, sirree.
By August 18th, they only had 10 days worth of food remaining. Would they be able to make it out of the canyon before their food ran out? Their adventure had become less focused on science and more focused on survival. After several days, they made an observation.
The rocks are changing. We're nearing the Grand Canyon's end.
It's less rough here. We've easily traveled 35 miles of river today. I'm optimistic the river will end soon.
And then they came to the most monstrous rapid yet, a giant rapid that looked impassable. For a whole day, the party planned the best course of action. but there was no easy path around it. They decided to portage over the first rapid, but they would have to ride the others. They would wait until the next day before tackling this terrifying rapid. They only had 5 days' food rations left. That night, Ormel Howland asked to speak with Powell in private.
Powell, I need a word. You've got to call off the expedition. Abandon the river. There is no way we can survive this giant rapid, and who knows how many more miles until the canyon's end. The danger is too great.
I'm certain the canyon will end soon and we can survive this rapid.
No, Powell. I'm afraid my brother Seneca, Bill Dunn, and myself are going to leave the party. We'll go no further. We'll take our chances and hike to a nearby Mormon settlement.
That's 75 miles away.
It's our best chance of survival. We'll help you portage the boats past the first fall, but then we're leaving.
The next day, once that had been done, the men divided up the supplies, leaving some of the equipment and things behind.
Here are some letters from us. If we don't return, please deliver them for us.
We'll leave the Emma Dean behind in case you three change your minds and want to join us. If we make it through the rapids safely, we'll fire our guns in the air for you to hear.
Powell and the 5 others boarded the 2 remaining boats and headed for the rapids. The Howland brothers and Dunn began climbing out of the canyon. Powell and the others would never see them again. The rapids were rough, but after a few moments, the party made it safely through. Three days later, John Wesley Powell and the others arrived at the mouth of the Virgin River, their destination. The date was August 30th. Their journey had taken 99 days. After 99 days, hundreds of miles, hundreds of rapids, the party finally reached their destination. Now in the video, you saw some pictures of a few locations. Here's the Granite Gorge, the Grand Canyon, Desolation Canyon. You saw these pictures in the film. But these pictures are actually from John Wesley Powell's second expedition, which took place in 1871. No pictures were taken during the 1869 expedition. So let's mark that on our map as our final. Whoop, there we go. One last thing I want to share with you before we end. You may have wondered what happened to Ormel and Seneca Howland and Bill Dunn. They were never seen by Powell or the others again. But why? What happened to them? Nearly a month after Powell and the others completed their adventure, a newspaper reported that 3 men had been killed by Native Americans. Was that them? Powell inquired into the issue, and after an investigation, it came out that that was the Howland brothers and Bill Dunn. The 3 were killed by a Shebite who was seeking revenge for his own friends who had been murdered by a party of miners. That was something that I didn't know about the story prior to my research, and it actually adds a little bit of a grim element to the reason why I enjoy this story so much. For me, the most memorable part of the story is what happened at Separation Falls when the party split. They were so close to the end of the canyon, and yes, they didn't know that. Yes, they only had a few days worth of food remaining and were worried about starving, and yes, they were tired, losing hope, and beaten down. But if the Howland brothers and Bill Dunn would have just stayed a little bit longer with the expedition, their names would have gone down in history with the others as completing their journey. They were so close to their destination and abandoned the group. And sometimes when I think about giving up, I think of the story and I think of those 3 men. And maybe you felt the same way before. Can you think of a time when something was difficult and you wanted to quit? Sometimes things get hard. You may get tired and frustrated too, but it's important to persevere, to keep trying and keep going. The end result may not be what you expected, but as long as you do your best and you don't give up, that's what's important. This expedition didn't end the way Powell wanted it to. He had to abandon his scientific equipment towards the end of their journey, which is why he went back in 1871 for a second expedition. And in that expedition, he was able to create an accurate map, which he had intended to make the very first time, which is a good example of if at first you don't succeed, try again. So I want to encourage you to read this book. I forgot to introduce it in the beginning of the video. This is called Down the Colorado, John Wesley Powell, the One-Armed Explorer by Deborah Cogan Ray. This is a 7th grade AR level book, 7.2, and it's worth 1 point if you take the AR test, which is impressive. But it's a really good book. I want to encourage you to read it. But 2 of my other sources that I read in preparation for this video, this big thing, The Promise of the Grand Canyon, John Wesley Powell's Perilous Journey and His Vision for the American West by John F. Ross. While this book was crucial in my research for this video, I would not recommend this book to anyone under the age of 18. For adults, though, it's well written and informative. Also, John Wesley Powell and the Great Surveys of the American West by Anne Gaines. This is a juvenile nonfiction about 5th grade and up. It does a nice job of dropping Powell into history and giving context of the world during the 1800s and why exploration was important at the time. So that is all that I have to share with you about John Wesley Powell. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you stay tuned for more. See you next time. Bye, guys.